DR as a service is here, and it's actually, we hit an inflection point where it should be considered over backup as a service. And what do I mean by that is that now we've got some really great ways to replicate tier one critical workloads from any on-premises location to a cloud, and be able to have the peace of mind to know that that data, that workload can be spun up almost instantaneously if disaster happens.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From InterVision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Cyber attack. It is top of mind for most of our listeners. It's top of mind for CIOs, CEOs, and boards. In the first half of 22 alone, there were 236 million ransomware attacks worldwide. 236 million. We've been hearing for the last couple of years how easy it is for nefarious actors to launch attacks through, of all things, ransomware as a service. To help you protect your organization, InterVision developed RPaaS, or Ransomware Protection as a Service. This service combines several award-winning services in the background into a comprehensive protection program that aligns to the NIST framework of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. I know I'm sounding like a commercial for RPaaS from InterVision, and that's not my intent. You know, here on Status Go, we don't really put our sales hats on. We're just trying to educate you on this program, and we're going to unpack what this comprehensive program looks like over several episodes. Today on Status Go, I am joined by Anthony Spiteri. Anthony is a senior global technologist of product strategy for Veeam, one of InterVision's strategic partners. He is also the host of a podcast, Great Things with Great Tech, or GTWGT for short. Veeam is recognized as a world leader in data protection and has been a partner of InterVision's for several years. Welcome to Status Go, Anthony.
Hey there, how you doing?
This should be you getting tongue-tied because as we're recording this, it's 9 o'clock at night in Australia, where you're from, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning in Indiana, where I'm from. So I obviously need more coffee, man, I tell you.
Yeah, well, look, I got to say, I just had a coffee, so maybe I'm cheating it at 9 o'clock at night. But this is usual for me at this time, so not a problem there.
Well, let's start in with your background. And if you don't mind just sharing a bit about your journey and how you came to be where you are today with Veeam.
Yeah, so I guess I've been with Veeam 6 years now, or nearly 6 years, which is crazy in itself. My background is actually in service providers, so I can be one of those people now in IT that says I've been in the industry for 20 years. I feel old, when I say that, but that's the way. But I started my career working for a ISP, ASP, application service provider, and got into hosting. Back then, my boss threw me a couple of projects and really got into the LAMP and Windows stack that we had for hosting, so websites, but also things like Exchange and SharePoint and CRM before they really became a thing. And then I kind of moved through a few different companies and really found my way and my love into virtualization and hosting infrastructure as a service. My previous role was at a leading VMware cloud service provider in Australia called Zetagrid. Worked with Veeam as well, probably along the way, and got to love what they were doing around backup, and wouldn't have never thought that I would actually be working for a backup company. I didn't think that was cool enough. I still don't think it's cool. But here I am. So now working the product strategy team in Veeam. My focus is on service provider and cloud technologies, but effectively, I do other cool stuff like work on our object storage technology. I'm the subject matter expert for that, and also our CDP technology within Veeam backup and replication. So you're right in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about with regards to ransomware.
And you go on the road a lot. You're traveling. I know there was a couple of times when we were doing prep calls that you were in the United States, and then I think you were in Europe. So you're a world traveler, kind of evangelizing what's going on within the Veeam ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I am again. I was. We were, obviously I wasn't for a couple of years there,
But
but
yes,
no, but
yes,
no one
yes.
was. But no one was. So look,
Yeah,
it's come back quick. It looks like it almost feels like we haven't missed a beat, but obviously we have missed 2.5 years of that. So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, what I love doing is getting out there and getting in front of people, in front of customers, in front of audiences, and talking about what Veeam's doing with the platform. And also just networking, but also, I guess, being part of the community. That's a big
yeah,
part of
yeah.
what I love, and it's community's helped me along the way, and I love interacting and reinvigorating those communication fronts with the technology.
Well, and it helps you hear the voice of the user community. And so let's start there. I opened the show with talking about the 236 million ransomware attacks in the first half of 2022 alone. What do you see going on in the ransomware landscape? What's your perspective of what's happening?
Um, you know what? I think we've been saying this for the last couple of years, really, more than ever. They're getting more sophisticated. Actually, I just saw one today that came through. That was actually it's a targeted attack through Steam. Steam is that gaming platform that distributes games and whatnot. It's been around for 20 years as well. So now what people are doing within the chat function and the boards within that Steam engine is that they're effectively laying down fake links that look like they're browser and browsers. So you look like you're in a browser, but you're actually in an iframe. And then that iframe
Ah,
is obviously doing some really bad stuff and effectively doing a lot of malware and getting all sorts of information off your PC or whatever it might be. So that was a really interesting one. Just shows you that it's ever evolving. In fact, I just had a conversation with our security uh, lead in the team in our Teams chat, and I kind of said, are the good guys ever going to get ahead? And and he said
yeah.
no, and that's the reality of where we're at. We're playing catch up all the time, the good guys, and that's where a company like Veeam is used as a tool. We talk about the Veeam platform as a tool set to
Hmm.
be able to offer customers and businesses and organizations the ability to protect their data, but not only back it up, but also recover successfully from an
Hmm.
attack. It's an end-to-end thing. It's not just about the education at the front. It's not just about the recovery. You got to have the right tool set. And Veeam as a company definitely offers our partners the ability to do that and leverage it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was amazed. This was pre-pandemic. I was going to say a couple years ago, but now thinking about it, it was 3 or 4 years ago when we had an ethical hacker presenting to a group of CIOs, and one of the things that he did that was really interesting was he raised a question with the group, and I will totally not be able to recall the exact question, but it was basically what type of traffic goes across this type of connection. And of course, the room answered with what is typically sent across that connection. And he says, well, that's not the way a hacker thinks. A hacker thinks, well, why can't I send other traffic across that link? And so trying to get inside the mind of a hacker, and it's like you were talking about on that gaming platform, those putting those links in there. You get people when they're not thinking about cybersecurity, they're thinking about playing a game or
Yeah,
they're thinking about reading an email or whatever it is, and that's when those attacks happen. And it's proliferating.
absolutely. And look, I'll be honest. Like I feel like I think even I've done it. I've clicked on a couple of links that I go, maybe I shouldn't have clicked on that. And just by the grace of God, I haven't been hit. Well, not that I think. I mean, someone could be listening to this conversation right now. Um,
Yeah,
but no, but I think the level of sophistication, the ability for them to hide themselves, to make them look like they're legitimate sources, it's incredible. I listened to a podcast called the Darknet Diaries. I don't know if you've come across that.
I've not heard of that one.
It's
Darknet
the
Diaries.
Darknet Diary. It's brilliant, and it's done by a security guy, an old school network guy. But the way that he articulates, just he gets guests on and he talks about certain types of attacks. He breaks it down, and it's really scary in terms of how
Yeah,
simple and how open we are to these attacks because they only have to get it right once and we
yeah,
have to be right all the time, right? So it's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, all on the flip side, we've got to be wrong once and they've got to get it right
Yeah.
once. So yeah, it's really cool how it works. I'm infatuated by the the whole ecosystem of ransomware and cyber
Mhm.
attacks. I think it's intriguing. Um, that said, I would never pretend to be and I don't actually want to be a security expert because it kind of scares me. So I'm quite glad to be on this side of the fence and just talking
That's
about it
right.
from a Veeam platform perspective, as opposed to
Yes.
being on the front lines.
Absolutely. You and me both. You and me both. Well, let's dive in a little bit to the Veeam platform. And I mentioned the NIST framework at the beginning of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Where does Veeam fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been building and aligning our capabilities with the NIST framework for a while now. So the capabilities that we have holistically on the platform can fit with those, detect, protect strategies that they've got in there: recover, identify, respond. And the way that we like to do it is we like to align it between, if you look at the left hand side of the equation being RTO, restore time objective, versus the right hand side, which is the RPO, the restore point objectives. You know, you look at that side, you've got protect and detect, and that really means traditional backups, leveraging things like offsite backups, CDP, replication, storage snapshotting, local backups. That's all part of the RPO strategy and the protect and detect.
Hmm.
Then, if you look at the other side, which is more identify, respond, recover, report, that's when we look at our other abilities, our reporting in Veeam 1, our secure restore, instant recovery, our archival retrieval, our data labs, and also things like our data integration API. All these sort of technologies and features, we're mapping them to that actual NIST framework. So it's quite interesting how we're doing that.
Well, and that was something that I learned when we had this conversation to prepare for this call was that Veeam really was also on that identify, detect side of the equation. So, how does Veeam 1 help with the identify or the detect, rather, probably?
Yeah, and I don't. And look, I think I'm very forward in saying that Veeam's never going to pretend to be a security company. I think that's a very, very
Hmm.
big component of that. We allow other companies to take advantage of our technology and innovate around that. Intervision do a great job of that in terms of what they offer on top of the Veeam platform. But Veeam is agnostic at heart as well. So we've got these features and and bits of the product that do align like I talked about. But then a customer or a partner might actually look at a third party provider and actually plug into that. So we might use
Ah,
for example, we've got the data integration API, which allows you to mount data directly from the repository to a disk onto another system. You can then mount that disk to some other third party tool to run compliancy checks on it, to do ransomware protection checks, deep dive for malware scans, all sorts of stuff,
mhm,
right? So I think
yeah.
that's how Veeam, you know, wants to position ourselves to kind of
Hmm.
be the data source, to be the component that backs up the data, can recover the data, but also unlock that data for ransomware protection and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, earlier when you were introducing yourself, you mentioned you've been in technology for 20 years. I double that. And since I can remember, we've been talking about backups and this concept of 3-2-1, three
Yeah.
copies, two different media, one offsite. Veeam extends that into something that I heard someone say 3-2-1-1-0. What is that, and how does that help me protect my data?
Yes, I've got to remember this and make sure that I'm getting this right as well. But no. Look, I think the extension of that just means immutability. So obviously,
Mhm.
adding an immutability factor to it, which has become so important because
Yeah.
we've understood over the years what has happened in ransomware in the last 5 years, 2 3 years, has that they started to target different areas of data. So they understood that, yeah, okay, you can take a backup of the data and you can put it somewhere, and that's the element that becomes the restoration point, right? But what
Mhm.
if we, as the bad guys, as the malicious users, were able to actually impact and manipulate and change that data as well and make it useless? What if we can
Yeah.
encrypt that? So that's area where backup vendors have had to start to get smart on to basically extend technologies like what we have in object storage. So S3 object storage has versioning and object lock, which allows you to effectively, through an API call, have that block of data actually locked away for a certain period of time. So even that a root resource, when we're talking administrative root resource, cannot delete that. So we've been implementing that across our whole technology stack. Firstly within our object storage support, and then secondly, we've released a hardened Linux repository which leverages elements of the ZFS file system on Linux to be able to do elements of immutability as well. And we're extending that across all of our portfolio as well, whether it's in the public cloud. It's not quite in the backup for Microsoft 365, but it will get there, and
Mm-hmm.
other bits. And that zero, can't forget that. That's a validation point as well. So how do you validate and verify that your
Yeah.
data is actually going to work for you? Because you can always back it up, but and I tell a story about when I was in my second to last job. We were protecting. We had an infrastructure environment, and we were hosting some really important websites locally in Australia, in Western Australia, where I am. And one of these government organisations got hacked, and they needed to basically go through the logs of their website to find out at what point it got hacked. And what happened
Mm-hmm.
was we had to recover the data from maybe 3 or 4 months ago because it was that old. We had this. This was before Veeam, by the way. I'm not going to. I must mention that as well. So what we went to do there is we actually the validation of the backup was a tick box that said, yeah, it's been checked, and the backup software was saying that it was backed up. When we came to recover that data, we were able to recover one component of it, but not the second component. So effectively, for 3 months, we really didn't have any legitimate backups of this
Oh, wow.
particular bit of data. And
Yeah.
funnily enough, that's what led us to try Veeam, and I guess in a strange way, that's what's led me to where I am now.
Yeah.
But it's just a really good example of the fact that you have to be able to validate your data. Veeam has always had that. We've got data, the data labs, Sure Backup. We can validate and check to make sure that what you've backed up is actually going to be recoverable as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is such an important step, is to that validation point. That's why I know Intervision preaches so much about testing your recovery. So you can validate it through software and through techniques that, yes, the backup was successful and it's validated, but the true test comes in when you test your recovery and really bring it back up. And I think that's also where Veeam plays very well in bringing those systems, or the data that's been protected, back online. Um, can you talk a little bit about how the storage protection within Veeam works? In other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what types of storage does Veeam protect? That if we've got listeners out there that aren't familiar, well, what different types of things can Veeam back up?
Well, effectively, if you look at the platform, we're backing up a lot more than what we did when I first started 6 years ago. When I started, we effectively backed up VMware and Hyper-V,
Mm-hmm.
and that was pretty much it. And then we extended ourselves to physical agents, and then we extended out to you know. Microsoft 365. We do public clouds now. We do Oracle. We do different types of Linux. We do Mac OS. So really, and then obviously the databases as well, because in today's world, a lot of if you were to ask a developer, what their storage systems are, they're going to say a database. They don't think of storage as a SAN or something like that. So we
Yeah.
protect databases as well, obviously. So yeah, we can protect more and more, and as we continue to evolve the platform, we'll just continue to expand. We extend out to Nutanix AHV. We do Red Hat virtualization and KVM based workloads. That specifically RHV. That was our most recent hypervisor. So we're about to launch Salesforce as another SaaS-based product. So there
Oh,
is a lot that we do
yeah.
now. It's not
Yeah.
just the old VMware that we used to do.
Well, one of the ones that jumped out at me as you were talking about that, Anthony, was public clouds, because I know for a long time there was this feeling that, well, if my data's in the cloud's backing it up. and that's not necessarily the case. So why would one of our listeners use Veeam to back up their public cloud data versus the tools that are inherent in the cloud itself?
Yeah, I think that's the first point. Yeah, that there was a misconception there that if, and I think this is obviously I heard it as well, and I've been hearing it all my
Yeah,
career because I've been working around. I used to host a lot of this stuff, and then we saw a lot of
yeah,
people move to the public cloud, so I got that. And it was always a little bit of a fallacy. However, those public clouds do have their own built-in mechanisms, and it's funny because I kind of leverage. I use an analogy. I mean, if you remember Windows used to have Windows backup, right?
yeah, yeah.
But would you? Did people really trust it for the protection of their data?
Hmm.
Like I know that you could use it to a certain extent, but you wouldn't bet your company, you wouldn't bet your organization, your brand, your
Yeah,
livelihood on it, right? So, uh, to a certain extent, that's how I kind of feel. We should be having this conversation around what the built-in backup products for the public cloud today are. They're good, but you kind of got to leave that to the professionals. you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
you could use a ton of analogies about I can't even think of them, like someone driving having a Porsche mechanic fixing a Hyundai or something, or the other way around. It just doesn't make sense for a professional to not do the professional's job. And
Hmm.
we actually leverage what the public clouds offers us as well. So we will talk to the same APIs that AWS or Azure might use. But what we do is we make them better. We take them, we build better technology on top of that to do more with it. We unlock portability. We can
Hmm.
unlock cost savings as well because we store data in smarter ways. Little things like that. But if I was to
Hmm.
say to the average person why, I would actually, always bring back the Windows analogy and the professionalism
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, it's who do you trust to protect your reputation? Because that's really what it comes down to in a lot of cases. So when you think backup versus continuous data protection, and Veeam specifically, where does Veeam play in that? Um, you've got Zerto and other tools that are on the CDP side, and then Veeam. So how do you decide what you're backing up with what?
Yeah, so this is interesting. We've had CDP. We've been talking about it for a long time. We finally released it in V11, and, almost a couple of years ago now, and we're enhancing it in V12, bringing it to our cloud and service providers. So hopefully, Intervision takes advantage of that and allows effectively on-premises workloads to be replicated at CDP RPOs up to their cloud. Now, the way that I've always talked about this is that Veeam offers a multiple policy approach to be able to back up your critical workloads. You really have to start to categorize your workloads. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, gold, silver, bronze, no matter what way you do it. Um, and then your most critical workloads, which you absolutely know you can't do without, which you know that if you even lose a minute of data that you're going to be in trouble. Those are the ones that really you should look at for CDP.
Uh-huh.
And then you can, tag those if you're using VMware vSphere as an example. You can tag those. You can set policies against Veeam's policies, which means that when those machines are created, they're tagged, they're automatically protected. And then that next level down, you've got snapshot-based replication, which still works pretty well. But there's certain problems with the certain size of machines and that sort of stuff, and
Hmm.
snapshotting and whatnot. And then you got more traditional backup, which is your point in time backups. Now, point in time backups can be used, up to 15-minute RPOs as well. Because you're taking a snapshot, but then it really just depends on how
Hmm.
much data and change rate is happening within that 15-minute period. And then you've got the archive as well. So that's that, let's go and push it out and actually almost put it away forever and never access it. So really, we've got 4 levels of, backup and replication that we can work with within the Veeam platform now, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see customers in thinking about a specific data set or application, protecting it with multiple types of technologies? They may be doing CDP to get that real low RPO, but they're also protecting it with with a more traditional point in time backup? Do you see that happen a lot?
Yeah, there are challenges with that. There are technical challenges with mixing and matching it. Unfortunately, there can be impacts on, like, as an example, if you were to try and take a snapshot-based backup with CDP running, you might come into a situation where the CDP element gets interrupted because there is a stun of that VM, while the
Oh,
snapshot's coming. So there are
yeah.
complications. However, there are other ways to do that, right? So you could use an agent in guest as an example to protect the data within a CDP enabled system, right? So, yeah,
Mhm.
there are ways to do that, but even our CDP mechanism actually has two levels of protection. Effectively, it's got the journal, which is basically you set a time period of, say, it's 4 hours. You want an RPO of 15 seconds. So for a period of 4 hours, every 15 seconds, you're snapshotting that data. So that's your RPO, that's your window. That's how far you can
Yeah.
go back 15 seconds, the granularity. But then you've also got an option to say every 8 hours, take a point in time. So within the
Yeah.
CDP mechanism and the policy, you have got the ability to do those two types of backups as well. So yeah.
So you can get that extra layer of protection. Well, let's talk about the other side of this, which is the recovery and the recovery time. When you're talking with customers, how do you set the RTO expectations? Because I've seen a lot of marketing out there that says, "Oh, this is push button DR. You just click a button and you got 5 minute RTO." I mean, how real is that, and how do you help your customers manage expectations?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from a couple of different angles, firstly, just a traditional customer, we've got instant VM recovery, right? So that instant VM recovery allows you to effectively mount and then stream a a machine off the backup repository. That's technology that we actually invented and patented, first and foremost, and have obviously been replicated in other competing vendors. We're okay with that.
Mhm.
Flattery is awesome in that sense. Imitation,
Yeah, yeah,
imitation flattery.
yep, yep.
However, that technology is just there to really lower the RTO. You can have a machine up and booting within seconds, effectively, with that technology. So pick a point in time. That's traditional replication. It's from a backup as well. It's really cool. Um, Now, what we've also been able to do more recently is we've been able to extend that to, say, object storage. So you can back up your machines or your workloads to an object storage repository. So it can be sitting out in the cloud or
Mhm.
on-premises object storage, but you can still instant recover off that. So we've actually, and I've done a ton of demos on stage and in front of customers where I've had a machine on premises, I've broken it in some way, and then I've basically done an instant VM recovery back to a vCenter and streaming that down off an AWS S3 or a Wasabi or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And when people see that, that's pretty cool because, in a
Yeah,
sense, your RTO is down to literally seconds at that point. Now, obviously, performance is going to be a little bit, different because not everyone's going to have SSDs and NVMe drives on their, repositories, even though some people are doing that these days
right,
because they
right.
can with our scale backup repository technology and the way you're able to architect it these days. Um, but the key point there is for any organization, you'll have your workload, your application up and running. It will run slightly degraded, but at least you've got it up and running. And then from there,
Yeah,
you can then move it to the the final resting place where you might do a storage remotion or whatever it might be. So
yeah,
yeah, lots of good ways to do it today. And I think it's still one of those technologies that I think we just take for granted, even though
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's still like magic how it happens, really, when you think about it.
It is pretty mind blowing when I think about the first DR test that I was involved in. I grew up on the application side of the world rather than the infrastructure side of the world, and that was back in the day. We had to drive to Chicago from Indianapolis, which is about a 3 hour drive, and everything was tape backup at that time. And we arrive at Chicago, and Joe looks at Bill and says, "You brought the tapes, right?" And Bill had not brought the tapes. So it's mind blowing to those of us who've been in this space for a long time to see that technology. So what I hear you saying though is that in certain use cases, you can recover in seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
There's going to be other use cases, like maybe it's a full data center recovery, or in the case of what we've been talking about, a ransomware attack where you have to protect and keep the environment whole for investigation and things like that. So I think there's lots of flavors of that our listeners need to be aware of as they're hearing some of those things. So Anthony, we're running near time, and I want to ask you, is there something that I haven't asked you yet today that is something that you really want our listeners to hear and understand about Veeam data protection and where it plays in ransomware?
Yeah, I think obviously immutability, like we've talked about, it's a very important one, and our providers are leveraging our immutability technology as well. So Intervision will be able to switch on those features, and their customers and their tenants get the benefit of that. That's one thing. I think one thing that I'm trying to focus on moving forward, and actually as a company, but it's a personal sort of journey for me, or personal sort of aim of mine, is to really, get the world to understand that DR as a service is here, and it's actually we're hit an inflection point where it's it should be considered over backup as a service. And what do I mean by that is that technologies like CDP, like Cloud Connect technology, Veeam working with great providers like Intervision, is that now we've got some really great ways to replicate tier one critical workloads from any on-premises location to a cloud that's a cloud that say Intervision is running, and be able to have the peace of mind to know that that data, that workload can be spun up almost instantaneously if disaster happens. I really want people to start to think that, because I think we haven't quite reached the inflection point with DR as a service where businesses think that they need it. I think, or actually know that they need it. Backup has been done, but I think most businesses will wait until something bad happens before they understand that they need DR as a service.
Yeah, there's nothing like that compelling event to change people's perspective.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, when we spoke earlier, that here on Status Go, we love to leave our listeners with a very explicit call to action. So what are one or two things our listeners should go do tomorrow because they listened to our conversation today?
Yeah. So I would say if you're an existing Veeam customer, go and check out a little bit more about what the platform can do, the little bells and whistles that we've got. Take a look at what we've got coming in V12, which is the next major release for Veeam Backup Replication. That's due in a couple of months. But then also take a look at what your service provider can do. If you want to be able to protect your workloads on premises and move them to the cloud, go have a look at Intervision, go have a look at the services that they are offering, because they will only help you in your greatest time of need.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And as we're talking more about ransomware protection as a service to our listeners, we're going to be talking about the different aspects of that as we move forward in this series. Anthony, I really want to thank you for carving out the time to talk with us today. I know the time differences between here and Australia can be a little difficult at times, so I really appreciate you taking some of your family time to talk with us today.
No worries. Good to be on the other side as well. I forgot what it was like.
To our listeners, if you have a question or want to learn more, visit intervision.com. The show notes will provide links. I will include a link to Anthony's podcast as well as to the one he mentioned, Dark Net Diaries. We'll include links for both of those in
Good
there,
shout out.
as well as contact. Absolutely. This is Jeff Tunn for Anthony Spiteri. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.